My name is Isabella, and I'm 29 years old. I never imagined the day my husband Derek would corner me in our kitchen and say, "It's either me or your mother, Isabella. You can't have both." What he didn't expect was that I'd choose my mom without hesitation. The look on his face when I packed my bags that same night was something I'll never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where this all began, because what happened that night was just the culmination of 3 years of manipulation, control, and emotional warfare that I was too blind to see until it was almost too late. I met Derek 4 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. I was 25, working as a marketing coordinator for a local tech startup, and still living with my mother, Catherine, while I saved money for my own place. Derek was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, charming, successful in real estate, and he had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the room. Our first few dates were magical. He took me to expensive restaurants, surprised me with flowers, and even seemed genuinely interested in my life and dreams. When he asked about my family, I told him proudly about my mother, a retired nurse who had raised me as a single parent after my father, Robert, passed away when I was 16. "She sounds amazing," Derek had said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I can't wait to meet the woman who raised such an incredible daughter." Those words should have been a red flag in hindsight, but at the time they made my heart flutter. Here was a man who appreciated the close bond I had with my mother, or so I thought. The first time Derek met Catherine was at Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd maintained since I was a child. Every week, Mom would cook a big meal and we'd catch up on life, share stories, and just enjoy each other's company. It was our sacred time together. Derek arrived with a bouquet of roses and his most charming smile. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, kissing Catherine's hand, "Isabella has told me so much about you. These are for the most beautiful woman in Phoenix. Well, besides your daughter, of course." My mother blushed and invited him in warmly. Throughout dinner, Derek was the perfect gentleman, complimenting her cooking, asking about her nursing career, and sharing stories about his own family. Catherine was clearly charmed, and I felt a warm glow of happiness watching two of the most important people in my life getting along so well. "He's wonderful, mija," Catherine whispered to me while we cleared the dishes. "I can see how much he cares about you." For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. Derek would join us for Sunday dinners, bring Catherine flowers, and even helped fix a leaky faucet in her kitchen. He seemed to understand and respect our close relationship. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small comments. "Do you really need to call your mom every day?" he'd ask after I'd hang up from our usual evening chat. "You're not a little girl anymore, Isabella." When I defended our daily conversations, explaining that it was just how we stayed connected, Derek would backtrack quickly. "I'm sorry, baby. I just miss having all your attention sometimes. I love how caring you are. It's one of the things I fell for." The comments became more frequent as our relationship deepened. When Catherine would call during our date nights, Derek would get a tight expression around his eyes, even though he'd smile and tell me to take the call. When I'd mention something my mother had said or advised, he'd respond with, "Well, what do you think? You don't always have to defer to your mom's opinion." At first, I thought he was just encouraging my independence, which seemed sweet. But gradually, I began to notice a pattern. Every suggestion Catherine made, Derek would subtly undermine. Every plan that involved spending time with her, he'd present an alternative that would take me away from her. When Catherine invited us both to her book club's annual potluck, Derek suddenly had an important client dinner that same night. When she suggested we all take a weekend trip to Sedona together, Derek surprised me with a romantic getaway to San Diego for the same weekend.
"We need couple time," he'd explain whenever I expressed disappointment about missing time with my mother. "Healthy relationships require boundaries with family." The word boundaries became Derek's favorite weapon. He wielded it like a sword, cutting away at the foundation of my relationship with Catherine, piece by piece. And the most insidious part was that he made it sound like he was helping me grow as a person. "Isabella, you're 26 years old," he said one evening after I'd spent the afternoon helping Catherine organize her closets. "Don't you think it's time to focus on building our life together instead of playing daughter to mommy?" When I pointed out that helping my mother wasn't playing daughter, but being a caring adult child, Derek sighed dramatically. "I'm not trying to be the bad guy here. I just want what's best for us, for our future." Our future. Those two words became the carrot he dangled in front of me whenever I resisted his attempts to distance me from Catherine. He'd talk about marriage, kids, the house we'd buy together, the life we'd build. But somehow, that future never seemed to include my mother in any meaningful way. A year into our relationship, Derek proposed. The ring was beautiful, the proposal romantic, and I said yes without hesitation. But when we started planning the wedding, the real battles began. "Don't you think it's weird for your mom to help plan our wedding?" Derek asked when Catherine offered to assist with arrangements. "This should be about us creating our own traditions." When Catherine suggested her favorite caterer, Derek had already booked someone else. When she offered to help with decorations, Derek insisted we hire a professional. When she wanted to give a speech at the reception, Derek convinced me that only the best man and maid of honor should speak to keep things streamlined. Each decision felt reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a pattern of exclusion that I was only beginning to recognize. Catherine never complained, never made demands, but I could see the hurt in her eyes as she was systematically pushed to the sidelines of my biggest life event. The wedding itself was beautiful, but looking back, I realized it was the beginning of Derek's most aggressive campaign to separate me from my mother. And like a frog slowly boiling in water, I didn't realize what was happening until it was almost too late. What I didn't know then was that Derek's charming exterior hid a controlling nature that saw my close relationship with Catherine as a threat to his dominance over me. He couldn't isolate me from her overnight, so he chose a different strategy: make me choose between them gradually until one day he'd force the ultimate choice. That day was coming sooner than I ever imagined, and when it arrived, Derek would learn that some bonds are stronger than manipulation, and some choices reveal exactly who someone really is. The real war for my soul was just beginning, and my mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise me, was about to become Derek's primary target in ways I never could have predicted.
Our wedding day in October was everything Derek had envisioned: elegant, expensive, and with minimal input from my mother. I should have seen it as a preview of our marriage, but I was too caught up in the fantasy of being a newlywed to notice the warning signs that were practically screaming at me. We moved into Derek's house in Scottsdale, a beautiful 4-bedroom place with a pool and mountain views. It was the kind of home I dreamed of as a kid growing up in my mother's modest 2-bedroom apartment. Derek made sure to remind me frequently how lucky I was. "Not everyone gets to live like this at 26, Isabella," he'd say, gesturing around our granite countertops and marble floors. "I work hard to provide this lifestyle for us." The implication was always clear. I owed him my gratitude, and part of that gratitude meant prioritizing his needs and wants above everything else, including my relationship with Catherine. The first major incident happened just 3 weeks after our honeymoon. Catherine had been battling a nasty case of bronchitis and had called to ask if I could drive her to a doctor's appointment. Her car was in the shop, and she didn't want to bother her elderly neighbor, Mr. Foster, who usually helped her with errands. "Of course, Mom," I'd said without hesitation. "I'll pick you up at 2 p.m. When Derek came home from work that evening, he found me making dinner and asked about my day. I'd casually mentioned taking Catherine to the doctor, expecting him to ask how she was feeling. Instead, his face darkened. "You left work early to drive your mother to the doctor?" "It was just an hour," I explained, confused by his reaction. "She's been really sick and her car—" "Isabella, she's a grown woman. She could have taken an Uber or called a taxi.
You can't keep dropping everything every time she has a minor problem." I stared at him, feeling like I was seeing a stranger. "Derek, she's my mother. She raised me alone after my father died. The least I can do is help her when she's sick." "And that's admirable," he said, his tone becoming patronizing. "But you have responsibilities now, to your job, to this house, to me. You can't keep running to mommy every time she calls." The word mommy hit me like a slap. There was such contempt in how he said it, such dismissal of the most important relationship in my life. But when I called him out on it, Derek immediately switched tactics. "Baby, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I'm just worried about you. You work so hard, and I hate seeing you stress yourself out trying to be everything to everyone. Your mom will figure it out. She's resourceful." This became Derek's pattern. Criticize my relationship with Catherine, then backtrack and frame his objections as concern for my well-being. It was masterful manipulation, and it worked because it made me doubt my own instincts. The second incident happened during Thanksgiving. Catherine had invited us to her apartment for dinner, as she had every year since I was a teenager. She'd been planning the menu for weeks, excited to host her first Thanksgiving as my mother-in-law. 2 days before the holiday, Derek announced that his boss had invited us to a catered Thanksgiving at his mansion in Paradise Valley. "This is huge for my career, Isabella," he explained. "Richard never invites junior associates to his home. This could mean a promotion, maybe even a partnership track." "But we already committed to dinner at my mom's. She's been cooking for days." "She'll understand. Family is important, but so is our future. Don't you want me to succeed?"
There it was again, our future being held hostage to his demands. When I suggested we stop by Catherine's apartment after the work dinner, Derek claimed it would be too late and we'd be too tired. "We can take her out for a nice dinner next weekend to make up for it," he promised. I called Catherine to break the news, my heart breaking as I heard the disappointment in her voice that she tried so hard to hide. "Of course, mija. Derek's career is important. We can celebrate another time." But I could hear her crying softly after she thought she'd hung up the phone. Derek's boss's Thanksgiving was everything I'd expected. Cold, pretentious, and filled with people who seemed more interested in networking than gratitude. I spent the entire evening thinking about Catherine eating her carefully prepared meal alone in her apartment, probably saving me a plate anyway because that's the kind of mother she was. When we got home that night, I found a text from Catherine with a photo of the beautiful table she'd set for 3, with a little note that read, "Missing you both, but so proud of Derek's success. Love you." That text message broke something inside me, but Derek's reaction was what really opened my eyes. "See, she's fine. You were worrying for nothing," he said dismissively when I showed him the photo. "She probably enjoyed having the leftovers to herself." The casual cruelty of that comment, reducing my mother's loneliness and disappointment to a joke about leftovers, was like a bucket of cold water. For the first time, I began to see Derek clearly, and what I saw terrified me. Over the following months, the incidents escalated. When Catherine slipped on ice and sprained her ankle, Derek convinced me that visiting her every day was excessive and that I should only check on her twice a week. When she mentioned feeling lonely since I'd gotten married, Derek suggested she find some hobbies instead of depending on us for entertainment. The worst part was how he made me complicit in hurting her. He never forbade me from seeing Catherine outright. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he created guilt, doubt, and conflict around every interaction until I began to self-censor my relationship with my mother to avoid his disapproval. I started lying to both of them. I'd tell Derek I was running errands when I was really visiting Catherine. I'd tell Catherine I was busy with work when Derek had plans that conflicted with our time together. The deception was eating me alive, but I couldn't see another way to maintain peace in my marriage while still being a good daughter.
What I didn't realize was that Derek's campaign against Catherine was just the beginning. He was systematically testing my boundaries, seeing how much of myself I'd sacrificed to keep him happy. And with each test I failed, he grew bolder in his demands.
The turning point came 8 months into our marriage during what should have been a celebration. Catherine had just received news that she'd beaten breast cancer, a diagnosis she'd hidden from me for months because she didn't want to burden me during my newlywed phase. I found out purely by accident when I stopped by her apartment unannounced and saw the medical paperwork on her kitchen counter. The dates showed she'd been going through chemotherapy treatments alone while I was playing house with Derek, completely oblivious to her suffering. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking as I held the discharge papers in my trembling hands. Catherine looked up from her tea with those tired eyes that I'd somehow failed to notice had grown hollow over the past months. "You were starting your new life, Mija. I didn't want to worry you with an old woman's problems." "An old woman's problems? Mom, you had cancer. Cancer. I should have been there for every appointment, every treatment. I should have—" "You couldn't have changed anything," she interrupted gently. "The treatments went well. I'm fine now. That's what matters." But I could see the hurt beneath her brave words. While I'd been worrying about Derek's moods and walking on eggshells to avoid his criticism of my relationship with her, Catherine had been fighting for her life alone. The guilt was overwhelming. I drove home that day with tears streaming down my face, determined to make things right. When Derek arrived home from work, I was waiting for him with dinner ready and a serious conversation planned. "Derek, we need to talk," I said as soon as he walked through the door. "My mother has been battling cancer for months, and I had no idea because I've been so focused on avoiding conflict between you two." Expecting shock, concern, maybe even guilt that his behavior had contributed to my absence during Catherine's illness. Instead, Derek's first words were, "Well, she's fine now, right? The treatment worked." The casual tone, the lack of empathy, the immediate pivot to damage control rather than compassion, it was like a punch to the gut. "That's not the point, Derek. The point is that my mother went through hell alone because I was too worried about keeping peace in our marriage to be there for her." Derek sat down heavily and rubbed his temples in that way he did when he was about to lecture me. "Isabella, you can't blame yourself for her decision not to tell you. You certainly can't blame me. I never told you not to see your mother." Technically, he was right. He'd never issued direct orders, but his constant criticism, his guilt trips, his subtle undermining had created an environment where I censored myself to avoid conflict. "You're right," I said carefully. "You never explicitly forbade it. But Derek, every time I spend time with her, you make me feel guilty about it. Every time she needs help, you make it seem like I'm choosing her over you. I've been walking on eggshells, trying to balance keeping you happy with being a good daughter, and I failed at both." His expression shifted to that wounded look he'd perfected. "Isabella, that's not fair. I've never asked you to choose between us. I just think healthy marriages require boundaries with extended family. My therapist in college actually talked about this, how some people struggle to separate from their parents and it affects their romantic relationships." There it was, the pseudo-psychology he loved to use to justify his controlling behavior. He'd started doing this more frequently, dropping references to therapy or relationship articles he'd read, always positioning himself as the expert on healthy relationships. "Derek, she's not extended family. She's my mother. And she was sick. And now she's better," he said firmly. "So instead of dwelling on guilt about the past, maybe we should focus on moving forward in a healthier way." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Derek slept peacefully beside me. I realized that in his mind, there was no problem with what had happened. In his worldview, Catherine's cancer was just an inconvenient complication that had resolved itself, and now we could return to the status quo of gradually diminishing her role in my life.
The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day with Catherine. We talked about her treatment, her fears, her loneliness during those long months. She showed me the journal she'd kept during chemotherapy, filled with entries about missing me but not wanting to interfere with my marriage. "I kept telling myself that you were building your new life," she said, showing me a particularly heartbreaking entry from her worst day of treatment. "I was so proud that you'd found someone who loved you. I didn't want to be the needy mother who got in the way." Reading those entries destroyed me. While Derek had been systematically poisoning my mind against my mother, she'd been protecting my marriage at the cost of her own comfort and support system. When Derek came home that evening and found me red-eyed from crying, his reaction was predictable. "You spent the whole day with her, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Yes, I did, and I'm going to spend tomorrow with her too. Derek's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes before he rearranged his features into his usual expression of patient concern. "Isabella, this guilt spiral isn't healthy for you. Yes, your mother was sick, but dwelling on it now won't change anything. You're torturing yourself over something that's already resolved." "I'm not torturing myself. I'm trying to rebuild a relationship that I let deteriorate because I was too afraid of disappointing you." That was the first time I directly called out his role in distancing me from Catherine, and Derek didn't like it one bit. "That's not fair, and you know it," he said, his voice taking on a hard edge I'd rarely heard before. "I have never, not once, told you not to see your mother. If you chose to limit contact with her, that was your decision. Don't blame me for your choices." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered Catherine's journal entries, her brave face during months of chemotherapy, her determination not to burden me, because she'd somehow gotten the message that needing her daughter was selfish. "You're right," I said quietly. "They were my choices. But they were choices I made in an environment you created where loving my mother felt like betraying my marriage." Derek stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating his next move. When he spoke, his voice was soft and wounded. "If that's really how you feel, Isabella, then maybe we need to talk about what kind of marriage you actually want. Because I can't compete with a relationship where I'm always going to come second." And there it was, the ultimatum dressed up as a conversation about our future. He wasn't ready to issue the final demand yet, but the battle lines were being drawn.
Derek's comment about coming second hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I could see he was waiting for me to rush to reassure him, to promise that he'd always be my priority, to apologize for suggesting that his behavior had influenced my choices. The old Isabella might have done exactly that. But something had shifted in me during those hours reading Catherine's cancer journal. I'd seen the cost of my attempts to keep Derek happy, written in my mother's lonely words and her determination to suffer in silence rather than burden me. "Derek," I said carefully, "I don't think loving my mother means you come second. I think it means I have room in my heart for both of you in different ways." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's a nice sentiment, Isabella, but actions speak louder than words, and your actions lately suggest that your mother's needs will always trump our marriage." "What actions?" I challenged. "Spending one day with her after finding out she had cancer? Wanting to rebuild a relationship that I let deteriorate?" "It's not just yesterday," Derek said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that always made my skin crawl. "It's the pattern. Every time there's a choice between what she wants and what I want, you choose her. The wedding planning, Thanksgiving, and now this dramatic guilt spiral over her cancer treatment. The way he dismissed Catherine's cancer as a dramatic guilt spiral made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. Derek, she's my mother. She raised me alone after my father died. She worked double shifts as a nurse to put me through college. She deserves my love and support, not my neglect. And I'm your husband, Derek shot back. I deserve to come first. That's what marriage means, choosing your spouse over everyone else, including family. There was something chilling about the certainty in his voice, as if he genuinely believed that marriage gave him ownership over all my emotional resources. That's not what marriage means to me, I said quietly. To me, marriage means building a life together that honors both of our important relationships, not abandoning everyone who came before. Derek's expression darkened further. Well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're not ready to be a real wife. The accusing hit like a slap. What's that supposed to mean? It means that every time we have this conversation, you defend your mother instead of trying to understand my perspective. It means you prioritize her feelings over mine consistently. It means you're still acting like a little girl who needs mommy's approval instead of a woman committed to her marriage. Each word was calculated to wound, to make me question my own judgment and priorities. Derek had gotten very good at this particular form of psychological warfare. I'm not choosing her over you, I insisted. I'm trying to have a healthy relationship with both of you. But that's not working, is it? Derek's voice became softer, more reasonable, which somehow made it more terrifying. We keep having the same fights. You keep feeling torn between us. Maybe it's time to admit that this situation isn't sustainable. Over the following weeks, Derek's campaign against Catherine became more aggressive and less subtle. When she called during dinner, he'd make exaggerated sighing sounds and mutter under his breath. When I mentioned plans to visit her, he'd suddenly remember important errands we needed to run together or romantic plans he'd made for us. The most insidious part was how he began recruiting others to his cause. At a dinner party with his colleagues, Derek shared a carefully edited version of our family situation that painted Catherine as an overbearing mother who couldn't let go of her daughter. Isabella's mom is sweet, he told his boss Richard and his wife, but she's having a hard time adjusting to not being the most important person in Isabella's life anymore. You know how some parents are. They struggle when their kids get married. The other couples nodded sympathetically, sharing their own stories about difficult in-laws and boundary issues. I sat there, mortified, as Derek painted my loving, supportive mother as a clingy, jealous woman who couldn't accept my marriage. It's hard on Isabella, Derek continued, reaching over to squeeze my hand in a gesture that looked supportive but felt possessive. She's caught in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy. I keep telling her that sometimes you have to make tough choices to protect your marriage. When we got home that night, I confronted Derek about his public humiliation of Catherine. How could you talk about my mother like that in front of your colleagues? You made her sound pathetic and desperate.
I didn't say anything untrue, Derek replied coolly. And frankly, Isabella, it's embarrassing for me professionally when my wife is constantly running off to take care of her mother's every need. People talk. They wonder who's really in charge in our marriage. The mask was slipping more frequently now. Derek was no longer bothering to hide his belief that marriage should mean total subordination to his wishes and image. The breaking point came during Catherine's birthday in March. She'd planned a small celebration at her favorite restaurant, inviting just me, Derek, and her two closest friends, Mrs. Foster and Mrs. Chen from her book club. It was going to be her first birthday since beating cancer, and she was so excited to celebrate with the people she loved most. 2 days before the dinner, Derek announced that his college buddy Marcus was coming to town for one night only and wanted to take us out for drinks. "You'll have to cancel with your mom," Derek said casually, not even looking up from his phone.
Marcus is only here for one night, and I haven't seen him in 3 years. Derek, it's my mother's birthday. Her first birthday since surviving cancer. I can't just cancel on her. She'll understand. You can take her to lunch the next day or something. No, I said firmly. This is important to her, and it's important to me. Tell Marcus we'll meet him for drinks after dinner or see him next time he's in town. Derek's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with anger. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not canceling on my mother's birthday dinner. Isabella, you're being ridiculous. It's just dinner. Your mother will have other birthdays. And Marcus will have other visits to Phoenix. Derek, this is non-negotiable. For a moment, Derek just stared at me, and I could see him recalculating. Then his expression shifted to cold fury. Fine, he said in a voice that promised retaliation. Go to your mother's birthday dinner, but don't expect me to sit there and pretend to enjoy myself while you choose her over me once again. I'm not choosing her over you. I'm choosing to honor a commitment I made to someone I love. Same thing, Derek said flatly. And Isabella, this pattern of putting your mother first is going to destroy our marriage. I hope you realize that. As he walked away, I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the threat in his words. It was the certainty. Derek wasn't warning me about what might happen to our marriage. He was telling me what he was going to make happen if I continued to resist his control. The war for my soul was escalating, and Derek was preparing for the final battle.
Catherine's birthday dinner was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. She wore her favorite blue dress and had gotten her hair done for the occasion. Her eyes sparkled with joy as she hugged me when we arrived at the restaurant, but I could see the questions behind her smile when Derek barely acknowledged her with a curt nod. Throughout dinner, Derek was technically present, but emotionally absent. He sat beside me like a stone statue, responding to direct questions with one-word answers and checking his phone constantly. When Catherine's friend, Mrs. Chen, asked him about his work, he gave such a dismissive, brief response that an uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Derek's been really busy lately, I said quickly, trying to smooth over his rudeness. But the damage was done. I could see the hurt and confusion in Catherine's eyes as she realized that my husband, the man she'd welcomed into our family with open arms, was treating her birthday celebration like a prison sentence. The worst moment came when Catherine opened my gift, a photo album I'd made chronicling her recovery journey with pictures from her last chemo session, her clear scan results, and a beautiful shot of her in her garden that I'd taken the week before. She started crying as she flipped through the pages, touching each photo with trembling fingers. "Mija, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," she whispered, pulling me into a tight hug. "Thank you for seeing my strength when I couldn't see it myself." I was crying too, thinking about all the moments I'd missed, all the times she'd faced her fears alone because I'd been too worried about Derek's reaction to be there for her. Derek's response to this emotional moment was to loudly clear his throat and announce, "We should probably get going soon. I told Marcus we'd meet him by 9. The callousness of interrupting such a tender moment to remind everyone that he had somewhere better to be was breathtaking. Catherine immediately released me and wiped her eyes, apologizing for getting emotional and insisting we shouldn't keep Derek's friend waiting. "It's okay, Mom," I said, shooting Derek a look that could have melted steel. "We have time." But the spell was broken. Derek had successfully poisoned what should have been a perfect evening, and everyone at the table knew it. When we finally left the restaurant, Catherine hugged me goodbye with an extra squeeze and whispered in my ear, "Take care of yourself, Mija. You look tired lately." In the car, Derek's silent treatment continued until we were almost home. Then he finally spoke, his voice dripping with disdain.
Well, that was exactly as painful as I expected. My mother's birthday dinner was painful for you? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Sitting there listening to you two carry on like she just won the Nobel Prize instead of beating at cancer that millions of people survive every day? Yeah, it was painful and embarrassing. I pulled into our driveway and sat there for a moment, engine running, trying to process what he just said. Then I turned to look him directly. Derek, what has happened to you? When did you become someone who thinks supporting a cancer survivor is embarrassing? When did you become someone who can't even fake kindness for 2 hours at an old woman's birthday dinner? When I got tired of playing second fiddle to your mother in my own marriage, he shot back. When I realized that you care more about her feelings than mine, every single time. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you chose me over her, Isabella? When was the last time you said no to one of her requests to prioritize something I wanted? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. Not because he was right, but because I realized the question itself was a trap. Derek was framing every act of love toward my mother as a betrayal of him, every moment of care as a zero-sum game where someone had to lose. Derek, loving my mother doesn't mean I love you less. Supporting her doesn't mean I'm choosing her over you. This isn't a competition. Everything is a competition, Isabella, and in this competition, I'm losing. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us. Then Derek turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the charm that had first attracted me to him. I've been patient with the situation for 3 years, he said quietly. I've tried to be understanding about your unhealthy attachment to your mother. I've tried to help you see that clinging to childhood relationships prevents you from fully investing in adult ones, but I'm done being patient. My heart started pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying it's time for you to make a choice, a real choice. You can't keep trying to have it both ways. Derek, please don't do this. Do what? Ask my wife to prioritize our marriage? Ask you to cut the cord with your mother and focus on building a life with me? Those aren't unreasonable requests.
But they were unreasonable. They were insane. Derek was asking me to abandon the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise me, who had battled cancer alone rather than burden me, who loved me unconditionally without trying to control or manipulate me. I won't choose between you, I said firmly. I love you both. I want you both in my life. That should be enough. Derek smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Well, it's not enough. Not anymore. He got out of the car and walked into the house, leaving me sitting in the driveway with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I knew with absolute certainty that Derek was building towards something, some final confrontation that would force the choice he'd been maneuvering me toward for months. What I didn't know was that the trigger would come just 3 days later, in the form of a phone call that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was in the kitchen making dinner when my phone rang. Catherine's name appeared on the screen, and when I answered, I could immediately tell something was wrong. Isabella? Her voice was shaky, uncertain. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I need to go to the emergency room. My blood turned to ice. What's wrong? What happened? I've been having chest pains all day and they're getting worse. I'd tried to wait it out, but Mrs. Foster insisted I call someone. I don't want to be dramatic, but you're not being dramatic. I'm coming to get you right now. I was already grabbing my keys when Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway. Where are you going? He asked, his tone deceptively casual. My mom is having chest pains. I need to take her to the hospital. Derek's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. She can call an ambulance if it's really an emergency. Derek, she's scared and alone. I'm not making her deal with this by herself. Isabella,
His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath it. "Sit down." "I don't have time to sit down. My mother needs me." "Your mother," Derek said slowly, "is a former nurse who knows the difference between a real emergency and anxiety. If she thought she was having a heart attack, she would have called 911. She called you because she wants attention." The cruelty of that statement, the complete dismissal of Catherine's fear and pain, was like a physical blow, but I didn't have time to process it fully because Derek was still talking. "And you're going to run over there like a trained dog, just like you always do. You're going to spend the night in some emergency room holding her hand while she gets attention for what's probably indigestion, and tomorrow you'll act like you're some kind of hero for abandoning your husband to rescue your mother from her own anxiety." "Derek, stop. Just stop. This isn't about attention or rescue fantasies. This is about my mother being scared and alone and needing someone who loves her to be there." "No," Derek said, his voice rising. "This is about you choosing her over me for the 1,000th time. This is about you prioritizing her dramatics over our marriage." I stared at him, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time who Derek really was underneath the charming facade. Here was a man so threatened by my love for my mother that he could dismiss her potential medical emergency as attention-seeking. Here was someone so controlling that he saw my care for anyone else as a personal betrayal. "I'm going," I said simply, heading for the door. "Isabella," Derek's voice stopped me cold. "If you walk out that door to go running to your mother instead of staying here with your husband, there will be consequences." I turned around slowly. What kind of consequences? Derek straightened to his full height, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and final. "The kind that will make you choose once and for all whether you want to be my wife or your mother's daughter, because you can't be both." I stood frozen in our foyer, car keys in my hand, staring at the man I'd married. Derek's ultimatum hung in the air between us like a sword, and I could see in his eyes that he meant every word. This was it, the moment he'd been building toward for months, maybe years. "Derek," I said quietly, "my mother might be having a heart attack." "Your mother," he replied with chilling calm, "is a 58-year-old woman who raised you to be codependent. She knows exactly which buttons to push to get you running to her rescue." The accusation was so outrageous, so cruel, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. Catherine had never been manipulative. Even during her cancer treatment, she'd gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid burdening me. The idea that she would fake chest pains for attention was not only wrong, it was evil. "I can't believe you just said that. I can't believe you're still standing here debating this instead of choosing your husband." Something cold settled in my chest as I looked at Derek, really looked at him. His perfectly styled hair, his expensive shirt, his handsome face twisted with self-righteous anger. 3 years ago, I thought he was everything I wanted. Now, I could see he was everything I needed to escape. "If I stay," I said slowly, "what happens to my mother?" "Your mother handles her own problems like an adult. And if I go?" Derek's smile was sharp and predatory. "Then you come home to an empty house and divorce papers." The threat was delivered so casually, with such confidence, that I realized Derek had been planning this moment for a long time. He'd systematically isolated me from Catherine, undermined our relationship, and now he was using my mother's medical emergency as the perfect opportunity to force his ultimate control. "You would really divorce me for taking my mother to the hospital?" "I would divorce you for choosing her over me. Again." I closed my eyes for a moment, and suddenly I could hear Catherine's voice from all the conversations we'd had over the years. Her encouragement when I doubted myself in college, her pride when I'd gotten my first job, her gentle wisdom when I'd struggled with decisions,
her unconditional love that had never come with conditions or ultimatums. Then I thought about Derek's love, if it could even be called love. Every gesture of affection had come with strings attached. Every moment of happiness had been contingent on my compliance with his wishes. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of owning me. When I opened my eyes, Derek was watching me with the expectant look of someone who was certain of victory. "You know what, Derek?" I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You're right. I do have to choose." His smile widened. "Good. I knew you'd come to your senses. I choose my mother." The smile vanished from Derek's face, like someone had flipped a switch. "What?" "I choose my mother. I choose the woman who worked double shifts to put me through college over the man who thinks helping her during a medical emergency is a betrayal. I choose the person who loved me unconditionally for 29 years over the person who spent 3 years trying to control and isolate me." Derek's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. "Isabella, you're being hysterical. You're not thinking clearly." "Actually, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." I headed for the door again, but Derek stepped in front of me. "You can't be serious. You're going to throw away our marriage for your mother?" "No, Derek. You threw away our marriage the moment you made me choose between the two people I should be able to love most in this world. You threw it away when you decided that your ego was more important than my mother's well-being." "Isabella, stop. Just stop and think about what you're doing. You're gonna regret this for the rest of your life." But I was already moving past him toward the door. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." Derek grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firmly enough to stop me. "Isabella, I'm your husband. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Being my husband should mean you support me loving my mother, not punish me for it. Being my husband should mean you're my partner, not my owner." I pulled free from his grip and walked out the door. As I drove to Catherine's apartment, my hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. Derek's ultimatum had stripped away all the confusion and self-doubt he'd cultivated in me over the years. The choice wasn't really between him and Catherine. It was between a life of freedom and authenticity and a life of control and manipulation. My phone started ringing before I'd even reached the end of our street. Derek's name flashed on the screen again and again. I let every call go to voicemail. When I arrived at Catherine's apartment, I found her sitting on her couch, pale and clutching her chest. Mrs. Foster was with her, looking worried. "Oh, Isabella, thank goodness," Catherine said when she saw me. "I'm sorry to drag you away from Derek, but the pain is getting worse." "Don't apologize, Mom. Let's get you to the hospital." In the emergency room, as we waited for the doctor's assessment, Catherine kept apologizing for causing trouble. She was so conditioned to minimize her needs, so afraid of being a burden, that she felt guilty for having chest pains. "Mom," I said, taking her hand, "you never have to apologize for needing help. You never have to worry about being too much trouble. I love you, and I'm here for you, period." Catherine squeezed my hand and smiled through her pain. "I love you too, Mija. But what about Derek? He must be worried." I looked at my mother, this brave, selfless woman who had just apologized for potentially having a heart attack because she was worried about inconveniencing others, and I realized something profound. Derek had been trying to convince me that loving Catherine was weakness, that our close relationship was unhealthy, that choosing her was choosing dysfunction. But looking at her now, I could see the truth he'd tried so hard to hide from me. Loving someone who loves you back without conditions isn't dysfunction, it's a gift. Having a parent who taught you to be caring and compassionate isn't a weakness, it's a strength. And anyone who tries to take that away from you isn't protecting you. They're diminishing you. "Mom," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something.
Derek and I are getting divorced." Her eyes widened with concern. "Isabella, what happened? Did you two fight because of me?" "No, Mom. We're getting divorced because Derek demanded I choose between him and you. And I realized that anyone who would make that demand doesn't deserve to be chosen." Catherine stared at me for a long moment, then pulled me into the tightest hug she'd given me since I was a child. "I'm so sorry, Mija, but I'm also so proud of you." As I held my mother in that sterile emergency room, feeling her heart beating against my chest, I knew I'd made the right choice. Derek had gambled that 3 years of manipulation had broken my spirit enough that I'd abandon everyone who truly loved me to keep him. He'd been wrong. But the real test was still coming, because Derek wasn't the type of man who accepted defeat gracefully, and I had no idea what he'd do when he realized I wasn't coming home.
Catherine's chest pains turned out to be a severe anxiety attack triggered by stress, but the emergency room doctor recommended overnight observation to rule out any cardiac issues given her recent cancer treatment. I stayed with her through the night, holding her hand as she dozed fitfully in the hospital bed. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts from Derek. Around midnight, I finally read through his messages, and the progression was like watching someone's mask slip off in real time. The first few texts were attempts at damage control. "Isabella, I was just stressed about work. Come home and we'll talk. I didn't mean what I said about divorce. We can work this out. Your mom will be fine. Please don't let one fight destroy our marriage." But as the hours passed and I didn't respond, Derek's true nature emerged. "You're being childish and dramatic. This is exactly the kind of behavior I was talking about. You always overreact. Fine, stay with your precious mother. See how that works out for you." The final text, sent at 3:17 a.m., was the most revealing. "You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. No one else will ever put up with your baggage." Reading those words in the dim light of Catherine's hospital room, I felt the last vestiges of doubt about my decision disappear. Derek wasn't hurt or heartbroken. He was angry that his control tactics had failed. He wasn't fighting for our marriage. He was punishing me for disobedience. When Catherine woke up the next morning, the first thing she asked was whether I'd heard from Derek. "He's been texting," I said carefully. "He's not taking the news well." Catherine studied my face with the perception that only mothers possess. "Isabella, tell me the truth. How long has he been like this?" I could have deflected, made excuses, tried to protect her from the ugly reality of my marriage. But sitting there in that hospital room, after choosing her over my husband's ultimatum, I finally felt free to tell the truth. "Since almost the beginning," I admitted. "It started small, little comments about our relationship, subtle discouragement when I wanted to spend time with you. I thought he was just jealous or insecure, something we could work through. But it got worse. Much worse. He's been systematically trying to isolate me from you for 3 years. Last night wasn't an explosion, it was the culmination of a long campaign." Catherine was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed," I said, tears starting to flow. "Because I thought if I could just find a right balance, if I could just be a better wife, I could make it work. Because he was so good at making me doubt my own perceptions." "Oh, Mija." Catherine pulled me into another fierce hug. "I'm so sorry you went through that alone. But I'm not sorry you're free of it now." Her response was so different from what Derek had conditioned me to expect, where he would have demanded to know why I hadn't trusted him enough to confide in him. Catherine simply offered understanding and support. Where Derek would have made my suffering about him, Catherine focused on my healing. Around noon, Dr. Martinez cleared Catherine for discharge. Her tests had all come back normal, confirming that stress and anxiety had triggered the chest pains. As we gathered her things to leave, she turned to me with a serious expression. "Isabella, you can't go back to that house alone. If Derek is as controlling as you've described, he might not react well to being left."
I hadn't thought about that, but she was right. In my mind, I'd already moved past Derek, but in reality, I still had to face the practical aspects of ending our marriage. Come stay with me for a few days. We'll figure out next steps together. As we drove from the hospital to her apartment, I called my workplace to request some personal time. My supervisor, Amanda, was understanding and supportive when I explained I was dealing with a family emergency and the beginning of divorce proceedings. Take all the time you need, Isabella. Your position will be here when you're ready to come back. It struck me how many people in my life offered unconditional support. My mother, my colleagues, even the hospital staff who had been kind to us through the night. Derek had tried to convince me that leaving him would mean isolation and regret, but the opposite was proving true. That afternoon, while Catherine napped, I sat at her kitchen table and made a list of everything I needed to do. Find a lawyer, gather important documents from the house, figure out living arrangements, and emotionally prepare for whatever Derek's next move might be.
Around 4 p.m., my phone rang. It was Derek, and something told me I needed to answer this call. Isabella. His voice was different, cold, controlled, completely devoid of the fake warmth he usually employed when trying to manipulate me. We need to talk. I think we said everything we needed to say last night. No, we didn't, because last night you were emotional and not thinking clearly. Today, hopefully, you've had time to consider the reality of your situation. The condescension in his tone was breathtaking. Even now, facing the collapse of our marriage because of his ultimatum, Derek was convinced that I was the one being unreasonable. What reality is that, Derek? The reality that you've thrown away a marriage to a successful man who loves you for what? To play nursemaid to your mother until she dies? To start over at 29 with no husband, no house, no financial security? Every word was calculated to trigger my fears and insecurities. Derek was trying to paint a picture of my future that was so bleak, I'd come running back to him in terror. Derek, you don't love me. You love controlling me. There's a difference. I love you enough to give you one more chance to come home and fix this, he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. But this offer won't stay open forever. Good, I said simply, because I'm not interested. The silence that followed was so long I thought he might have hung up. When Derek finally spoke again, his voice was like ice. You have no idea what you've just done, Isabella. No idea at all. He hung up, leaving me staring at my phone with a chill running down my spine. The threat in his final words was unmistakable, but I couldn't imagine what Derek thought he could do to me now that I'd already walked away from everything he could take. I was about to find out that Derek's capacity for cruelty went deeper than I'd ever imagined, and that leaving him was only the beginning of my fight for freedom. But for the first time in years, I wasn't facing that fight alone. Catherine appeared in the kitchen doorway, having been awakened by my phone conversation, and without a word, she came over and put her arms around me. Whatever he's planning, she said quietly, we'll handle it together. Those words, we'll handle it together, were like a lifeline. For 3 years, Derek had made me believe that needing support was weakness, that depending on family was dysfunction. But sitting there in my mother's kitchen, feeling her strength and love surround me, I realized that the opposite was true. Having people who stand with you unconditionally isn't weakness, it's power. And Derek was about to learn that he'd picked a fight with someone who was no longer standing alone. Derek's retaliation began exactly 24 hours after our phone conversation. I was at Catherine's kitchen table, researching divorce attorneys on her laptop, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. At first, I thought it was more angry text from Derek, but when I looked at the screen, I saw something much worse. The notifications were from Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. People commenting on posts I hadn't made. With growing horror, I opened my social media accounts to find that Derek had somehow gained access to all of them and posted a carefully crafted narrative of our marriage's end. On Facebook, he'd posted a long, emotional message that painted me as an unstable woman who had abandoned her loving husband for no reason. Quote,
It's with a heavy heart that I share that Isabella and I are separating. Despite my best efforts to support her through some serious mental health challenges, she's chosen to end our marriage to focus on an unhealthy relationship with her mother. I've tried for years to help Isabella establish healthy boundaries, but unfortunately, some people aren't ready to grow up and be true partners. I wish for the best in her healing journey. On Instagram, he'd posted a photo of our wedding day with a caption about being blindsided by my sudden decision to leave him for family drama. On LinkedIn, he'd crafted a professional-sounding post about learning to cope when personal challenges affect your work life and how he was grateful for the support of colleagues during this difficult time. But the worst was what he'd posted on my accounts, making it look like I had written them. He'd posted rambling, unstable-sounding messages about being confused and not thinking clearly and needing time to figure out what I really want. One post even included an apology to Derek for putting him through this and promised that I was working on getting better. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from friends, colleagues, and distant relatives who had seen these posts and were concerned. Catherine found me staring at my phone in shock, tears streaming down my face. "Mija, what's wrong?" I showed her the posts, watching her expression shift from confusion to fury as she read Derek's manipulative narrative. "This is—" She paused, clearly struggling to find words strong enough to convey her outrage. "This is evil, Isabella. This is calculated character assassination." "How did he even get into my accounts?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Did you ever give him more passwords?" I thought back and realized that over the course of our marriage, Derek had gradually gained access to all my digital life. He'd asked for my phone passcode in case of emergencies. He'd used my laptop when his was being repaired, and somehow my passwords had been saved. He'd convinced me that married couples should have complete transparency with each other. What I thought was intimacy and trust had actually been Derek building an arsenal of weapons to use against me if I ever tried to leave. The phone calls were the hardest part. My colleague Rachel called, worried and confused by the LinkedIn post. My college friend Monica called after seeing the Instagram story, asking if I was okay and if Derek was taking care of me during my breakdown. Even my boss Amanda called, concerned about the mental health implications Derek had posted about and wanting to know if I needed extended leave or professional help. Each conversation was excruciating. I had to explain repeatedly that Derek had posted those things without my permission, that I wasn't having a breakdown, that his version of events was a complete fabrication. Some people believed me immediately. Others seemed skeptical, clearly wondering if my denials were part of whatever mental health crisis Derek had described. The cruelest part was how Derek had weaponized people's genuine concern for me. By painting me as mentally unstable, he'd made it so that anything I said in my own defense could be dismissed as delusion or hysteria. "We need to call a lawyer," Catherine said after watching me field the 5th concerned phone call in an hour. "This goes beyond a messy divorce. This is harassment and defamation." That afternoon, we met with Sarah Chen, a divorce attorney who specialized in cases involving emotional abuse and control. Sarah was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened to our story with growing anger. She said, "What your husband has done is illegal on multiple fronts," she bluntly said. "Accessing your accounts without permission is computer fraud. Posting false information about your mental health is defamation. And creating a false narrative to damage your reputation and relationships is emotional abuse."
"Can we make him take the posts down?" I asked. "We can file for emergency injunctive relief, but the damage may already be done. Derek knows that. He's not trying to win you back. He's trying to punish you for leaving and make sure everyone in your life questions your version of events." Sarah explained that Derek's strategy was textbook behavior for controlling abusers who lose their primary victim. He can't control you anymore, so he's trying to control how others perceive you. He wants to isolate you by making people think you're unstable or untrustworthy.
The legal wheels moved slowly, but Sarah was able to get a cease and desist letter to Derek within 48 hours, demanding he remove the posts and stop accessing my accounts. His response came through his own attorney, a dismissive letter claiming that Derek had simply been expressing his feelings about his failed marriage and that any posts on my accounts had been made with my previous consent. Meanwhile, the social media campaign was working exactly as Derek had intended. Some of my friends rallied around me, but others became distant and uncertain. A few colleagues started treating me differently at work, as if they were waiting for me to have the breakdown Derek had described. The worst moment came when I ran into our former neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, at the grocery store. She'd always been friendly before, but now she looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Isabella, honey, I saw Derek's posts about your situation. Are you getting the help you need? Because if you're having some kind of crisis, you shouldn't be making big life decisions right now." Standing there in the cereal aisle, being questioned about my mental stability by someone who had known me for years, I felt the full weight of what Derek had done. He hadn't just attacked my reputation, he had attacked my reality itself, making people question whether I could be trusted to know my own mind. That night, lying on Catherine's couch and staring at the ceiling, I felt more alone than I had since my father died. Derek's smear campaign was working. People who had known me for years were suddenly uncertain about my stability and judgment. Some days, even I started to wonder if maybe Derek's version of events had some truth to it. But every time those doubts crept in, Catherine was there to remind me of what was real. "Mija, remember what your father used to say? The truth is like a cork in water. You can push it down, but it always rises to the surface." What if it doesn't this time? What if Derek's lies become the truth that everyone believes? Catherine sat down beside me and took my hands in hers. "Then we'll know who our real family is, because the people who truly love you won't believe lies about you, no matter how convincing they sound." Her words gave me strength, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek wasn't done yet. The social media attack had been just the opening salvo. He'd promised that I had no idea what I'd done by leaving him, and I was beginning to understand that his capacity for revenge went deeper than public humiliation. Derek had spent 3 years learning my vulnerabilities, my fears, and my weak points. Now he was going to use every piece of that knowledge to destroy me in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. But what Derek hadn't counted on was that in trying to isolate me from everyone who loved me, he'd actually revealed who my true allies were. And those people, my mother, my real friends, and my supporters, were about to show him that he'd picked a fight with more than just me.
3 weeks after leaving Derek, I was finally beginning to see the outline of my new life emerging from the wreckage of the old one. Sarah Chan had successfully gotten most of Derek's defamatory posts removed, though screenshots continued to circulate among people who seemed to enjoy drama more than truth. The legal process was slow but steady, and every day brought new evidence of Derek's systematic campaign of control and manipulation. The most surprising discovery came when Sarah subpoenaed Derek's phone records and found evidence that he'd been monitoring my communications for months. He'd installed tracking software on my phone during one of his security updates and had been reading my texts, emails, and even tracking my location. What I'd thought was Derek being attentive and caring, always knowing where I was, asking about my day with such specific details, had actually been digital stalking. "This changes everything," Sarah told me as we reviewed the evidence. "This isn't just emotional abuse anymore. This is criminal behavior. We're talking about stalking charges, computer fraud, invasion of privacy. Derek could face serious legal consequences." But even more important than the legal victories was the personal growth I was experiencing. Living with Catherine again at age 29 could have felt like a step backward, but instead it felt like coming home to myself.
Without Derek's constant criticism and manipulation, I was rediscovering who I actually was beneath all the people-pleasing and self-doubt he'd cultivated in me. "You're laughing again," Catherine observed one morning as we shared coffee and watched the sunrise from her small balcony. "I hadn't realized how long it had been since I heard you really laugh." She was right. The sound of my own genuine laughter was startling. It felt rusty, like a musical instrument that hadn't been played in years. Derek had found ways to diminish or dismiss anything that brought me joy, convincing me that my sense of humor was inappropriate or my enthusiasms were childish. Now, freed from his judgment, I was remembering what it felt like to find things genuinely funny instead of carefully monitoring my reactions for his approval. I'd also started therapy with Dr. Martinez, a specialist in domestic abuse recovery. At first, I'd resisted the term domestic abuse, thinking it only applied to physical violence. But Dr. Martinez helped me understand that Derek's systematic isolation, emotional manipulation, and control tactics were textbook examples of psychological abuse. Abusers don't usually start with violence. They start with testing boundaries, creating dependency, and gradually eroding their victim's sense of reality and self-worth. Derek spent 3 years conditioning you to doubt your own perceptions and prioritize his needs over your own well-being. The therapy sessions were difficult but liberating. For the first time, I was able to examine my marriage without making excuses for Derek's behavior or blaming myself for not being a good enough wife. I began to see the pattern of escalation that had been invisible to me while I was living it, how Derek had gradually isolated me from Catherine, criticized my friendships, controlled our finances, and positioned himself as the sole authority on what was normal in relationships. The ultimatum he gave you wasn't spontaneous. It was the culmination of a long-term strategy. He'd been systematically weakening your support system for 3 years, conditioning you to believe that choosing anyone over him was selfish and wrong. He genuinely expected you to sacrifice your mother rather than lose him. What if I had chosen him? I asked, though I already knew the answer would disturb me. Then he would have escalated to the next level of control. The demands would have gotten bigger, the isolation more complete. He would have found new people and relationships to target until you had no one left but him. The realization was chilling, but also validating. My instinct to choose Catherine hadn't just been about love for my mother. It had been about survival. Some part of me had recognized that giving in to Derek's ultimatum would have meant losing myself completely. As the weeks passed, I began to reconnect with friends Derek had gradually pushed out of my life. My college roommate, Lisa, drove down from Flagstaff for a weekend visit, and we talked for hours about how Derek had made me too busy to maintain our friendship. My former coworker, James Halloran, who Derek had convinced me was obviously interested in more than friendship, reached out with support and encouragement when he heard about the divorce. I always thought something was off about Derek. He had this way of answering for you or interrupting when you were talking, but you seemed happy, so I figured it wasn't my place to say anything.
These conversations helped me understand how Derek's control had been visible to others, even when it was invisible to me. The isolation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a gradual process of making me uncomfortable maintaining relationships until I'd chosen to step back from them rather than deal with Derek's subtle punishments. The biggest revelation came during a dinner with Catherine's book club, a group of retired women who had known me since childhood. These were women Derek had dismissed as gossipy old ladies whose opinions didn't matter. But listening to them talk that evening, I realized they were some of the wisest, strongest people I knew. "We were so worried about you," Mrs. Foster confessed over dessert. "You'd gotten so quiet, so careful about everything you said. It was like watching someone disappear into themselves." "Why didn't anyone say anything?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "We tried," Mrs. Chen said gently. "Your mother was beside herself with worry, but she was afraid that pushing too hard would drive you away completely. Derek was very good at making it seem like any criticism of him was an attack on your happiness. The conversation revealed how Derek had manipulated not just me, but everyone around me. He'd positioned himself as my protector while simultaneously isolating me from the people who actually wanted to protect me. He'd made my support system afraid to speak up because he'd convinced everyone that their concerns would damage my marriage and my happiness. Abusers are often charming to outsiders, Catherine said later as we drove home. They have to be, because part of the control is making their victim feel like no one would believe them if they spoke up. Derek worked very hard to make sure everyone saw him as the perfect husband. As spring turned to summer, I began to build a new life that felt authentically mine for the first time in years. I found my own apartment, a small but bright one-bedroom place just 10 minutes from Catherine's. I redecorated with colors and furniture that I loved, not pieces chosen to match Derek's aesthetic preferences. I started taking salsa dancing lessons, something Derek had always dismissed as not really our thing. Most importantly, I began to understand the difference between healthy love and controlling behavior. Catherine's love for me had always come without conditions or ultimatums. She'd supported my marriage to Derek even when she had concerns because she trusted my judgment and wanted my happiness. She'd endured cancer treatment alone rather than risk interfering with my new life. Her love had always been about what was best for me, not what made her feel most important. Derek's love, by contrast, had always been conditional. Every gesture of affection had come with strings attached. Every moment of approval had been contingent on my compliance with his wishes. He hadn't loved me. He'd loved the version of me that he was trying to create through manipulation and control. The divorce proceedings moved forward steadily. Derek's lawyer tried various tactics to pressure me into a quick settlement, but Sarah was relentless in documenting his abusive behavior and illegal activities. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually Derek was forced to accept terms that favored me significantly. "He's agreed to everything," Sarah told me during our final meeting. "Full financial settlement, no alimony claims against you, and most importantly, a permanent restraining order that includes digital harassment." As I signed the divorce papers, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The woman who had walked out of that house on the night of Catherine's medical emergency was broken and uncertain. The woman signing these papers was whole, confident, and surrounded by people who loved her without trying to control her. "How do you feel?" Catherine asked as we left the lawyer's office. I thought about it for a moment. Considering all the ways my life had changed since that night Derek had forced me to choose. "Free," I said simply. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free."
6 months have passed since that night Derek cornered me in our kitchen and demanded I'd choose between him and my mother. As I sit here in my sunny apartment, typing this story on a laptop that belongs only to me, with my phone containing only messages from people who genuinely care about my well-being, I can barely recognize the woman I was a year ago. The transformation hasn't been easy or instant. Healing from psychological abuse is like recovering from a serious injury. It takes time, patience, and a lot of hard work. There were days when I questioned everything, when Derek's voice in my head told me I'd made a terrible mistake, when the isolation he'd warned me about felt very real. But those dark moments became fewer and farther between as I rebuilt my life on a foundation of authentic relationships and genuine self-worth. The difference between my old life and my new one isn't just about Derek being gone, it's about understanding what healthy love actually looks like. Catherine and I have developed an even stronger relationship than we had before my marriage. Without Derek's interference and manipulation, we've been able to communicate openly about everything, including the ways his behavior affected both of us. She's told me about the nights she cried herself to sleep, worried about my growing isolation and the changes she saw in me. I've shared with her the shame and confusion I felt during those 3 years,
the constant sense that I was failing as both a daughter and a wife. "I kept thinking I was losing you," she admitted during one of our long conversations. "Not to Derek specifically, but to someone I didn't recognize. You became so careful, so anxious about everything you said and did. It was like watching my confident, joyful daughter fade away." Hearing her perspective helped me understand how Derek's abuse had ripple effects beyond just our marriage. His systematic campaign to isolate me from Catherine hadn't just hurt me, it had caused her enormous pain and worry. The guilt I carried about that led to several therapy sessions focused on understanding that Derek's manipulation wasn't my fault, even when it caused harm to people I loved. The legal aftermath of our divorce continued for months after the papers were signed. Derek's digital stalking and harassment resulted in criminal charges, and he ultimately pleaded guilty to computer fraud and cyberstalking. The restraining order remains in effect, and I haven't heard from him directly since the divorce was finalized. But perhaps more importantly, the people in my life rallied around me in ways that contradicted everything Derek had predicted. He'd told me that leaving him would mean isolation and regret, that no one would understand my choice, that I'd be alone and struggling without his support. The reality has been exactly the opposite. My colleagues at work, once they understood the full scope of Derek's manipulation, became incredibly supportive. Amanda, my supervisor, even shared her own story of leaving an emotionally abusive relationship in her 20s. My friends who had gradually drifted away during my marriage reached out with love and understanding once they learned what had really been happening. "We always wondered why you seemed so different when Derek was around. You were like a dimmed version of yourself, always checking his reactions before you laughed or spoke up about anything," my friend Lisa told me. Even some of Derek's friends and colleagues reached out privately to express support. His former assistant Marcus sent me a message months after the divorce. "I always thought something was off about how he talked about you and your family. I'm glad you found the strength to leave." These revelations helped me understand that Derek's charm and manipulation hadn't fooled everyone. Many people had sensed something wrong but hadn't known how to help or hadn't wanted to interfere in what looked like a happy marriage from the outside. The most unexpected source of support came from other women who had experienced similar relationships. Word of my stories spread through social networks and support groups, and I began receiving messages from women who recognized their own experiences in mine. "Your story helped me realize that I wasn't crazy," one woman wrote. "My ex-husband used the same tactics, making me choose between him and my family, making me feel guilty for wanting to maintain other relationships. I thought I was the only one." These connections led me to volunteer with a local domestic violence organization, sharing my story at support groups and helping other women recognize the signs of emotional abuse. It's become one of the most meaningful parts of my new life, turning my painful experience into something that can help others. Abuse isn't always bruises and black eyes, I tell the groups I speak to. Sometimes it's a partner who makes you feel guilty for loving your family. Sometimes it's someone who gradually convinces you that your instincts are wrong, that your relationships are unhealthy, that you need them to interpret reality for you.
Dr. Martinez continues to be an important part of my healing journey. In our recent sessions, we've been working on what she calls rebuilding my internal compass, learning to trust my own judgment again after years of having it undermined and dismissed. The fact that you chose your mother over Derek's ultimatum shows that your instincts were still working, she reminded me during our last session. Even after 3 years of manipulation, some part of you knew what was right and wrong, what was love and what was control. That realization has been crucial to my recovery. I didn't leave Derek because I was rebellious or selfish or mentally unstable, as his social media campaign had suggested. I left because, at the deepest level, I recognized that his demand was fundamentally wrong, that real love doesn't require you to abandon everyone else who loves you. Catherine's health scare that night wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a moment of clarity that cut through years of confusion and manipulation. When Derek dismissed her chest pains as attention-seeking drama, when he demanded I choose between being a good wife and being a good daughter, the fog lifted, and I could see our relationship clearly for the first time. Today, Catherine and I have Sunday dinners together every week, just like we did before Derek entered our lives. But now they're even more precious because I understand how close I came to losing them forever. We cook together, share stories about our weeks, and sometimes just sit in comfortable silence, grateful for the relationship we fought so hard to preserve. I've also been dating again, slowly and carefully. The experience has been eye-opening because I now recognize red flags that I would have missed completely before my marriage to Derek. When someone tries to monopolize my time or criticizes my close relationships, I know immediately that they're not right for me. "You're so much more confident now," Catherine observed recently. "You know what you want and what you won't accept. Derek tried to break you, but instead, he taught you how strong you really are." If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're in a relationship where you feel guilty for loving your family, where you're constantly walking on eggshells to avoid conflict, where you've started to doubt your own perceptions and judgments, please know that you deserve better. You deserve love that doesn't come with ultimatums. You deserve a partner who celebrates your other relationships instead of undermining them. You deserve to feel confident in your own choices without constantly seeking approval or fearing punishment. If someone in your life is making you choose between them and the people who've loved you unconditionally, choose the people who don't make you choose. Choose the people who want what's best for you, not what's most convenient for them. Choose the love that builds you up instead of breaking you down. The night Derek said, "Pick me or your mom," he thought he was cornering me with an impossible choice. What he actually did was show me exactly who he was and exactly what our marriage was worth. He gave me the clarity I'd been missing for 3 years, wrapped up in the form of an ultimatum. He wasn't ready for my choice because he'd spent so long conditioning me to prioritize his needs that he forgot I was still capable of choosing myself and the people who genuinely loved me. He wasn't ready to learn that manipulation has an expiration date, that control only works as long as the other person is willing to be controlled. Most of all, he wasn't ready to discover that trying to force someone to abandon their family doesn't make you more important to them. It makes you irrelevant. My name is Isabella. I'm 30 years old, and I chose my mother. It was the best decision I ever made.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.